Hello and welcome to a special broadcast here on WION World is One. You are watching the continuous coverage of the United Nations General Assembly session, including the speeches by the leaders of India and Pakistan. We get you a 360-degree perspective from Team WION in New York, comprising my colleagues Palki Sharma Upadhyay, Siddhant Sibbal and Anas Malik. Also joining me are three very special guests, Tilak Deveshwar and Arun K. Singh from India, and Anish Goyal from the United States. Tilak Deveshwar is a member of the India's National Security Advisory Board and the author of 3 books and counting on Pakistan. Arun K. Singh is a former Indian envoy to the United States, France and Israel. And Dr. Anish Goyal is a former White House official for Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining me on WION World is One. Let's get started. Now, first up, let's listen into the contrasting speeches by the leaders of India and Pakistan.
हम उस देश के वासी हैं जिसने दुनिया को युद्ध नहीं बुद्ध दिए हैं, शांति का संदेश दिया है। अध्यक्ष महोदय, 125 साल पहले भारत के महान आध्यात्मिक गुरु स्वामी विवेकानंद जी ने अमेरिका में शिकागो में वर्ल्ड पार्लियामेंट ऑफ रिलीजन के दौरान विश्व को एक संदेश दिया था। ये संदेश था हार्मनी एंड पीस एंड नॉट डिसेंशन। विश्व के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र का आज भी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय समुदाय के लिए यही संदेश है, हार्मनी एंड पीस। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Islamophobia. There are 1.3 billion Muslims in this world. There are millions of Muslims living in other countries, European countries, and the US as minorities. Islamophobia since 9/11 has grown at a pace where it is alarming. Human communities live together. There should be understanding amongst them. But Islamophobia is creating a division. Muslim women wearing hijab, it's become an issue. It's become an issue in some countries. Hijab is some sort of a weapon. A woman can take off her clothes in countries, but she can't put on more clothes. How is this happening? Because of Islamophobia. And how did this Islamophobia start? After 9/11. And why did it start? Because certain Western leaders equated terrorism with Islam. Islamic terrorism. Radical Islam. What is radical Islam? There is only one Islam. And that is the Islam we follow of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is no other Islam. Radical Islam, Islamic terrorism, what message did they send to people in the West? And why is there Islamophobia? How is a person in New York, in the Midwest, in the US, in European capital, how is he going to distinguish between who is a moderate Muslim and who's a radical Muslim? Because terrorism has nothing to do with any religion. This Islamic terrorism, Islamic radicalism, and sadly used by leaders, this has been the main reason for this Islamophobia. And it has caused pain amongst Muslims. We in Muslim countries watch this Islamophobia traveling abroad, and it's getting worse. And may I just say, Mr. President, that in European countries, it is marginalizing Muslim communities. And we all know that marginalization leads to radicalization. Some of the people who ended up as militants in Syria and other places were from marginalized Muslim communities. And my point here is that we must address this issue.
All right, Tilak Deveshwar, there you heard Imran Khan's speech, or was it a rant on Jammu and Kashmir? I don't know. But anyway, just to recap for the benefit of viewers who might just be tuning in, and I quote Imran Khan here, he says, there will be a bloodbath when the curfew is lifted in Jammu and Kashmir, number one. Number two, Kashmiris will be further radicalized. Number three, there will be another Pulwama and India will blame Pakistan. And number four, he justifies violence and terror and says, I will myself pick up the gun. Your thoughts, Tilak Deveshwar?
You know, it's really unfortunate and it's a very disconcerting to hear a leader of a country talk in such terms. What he's actually doing is inciting people to violence.
Right.
You know, by saying that there will be a bloodbath, there will be another Pulwama, and I will pick up the gun myself. And he also goes on to talk about the 180 million Muslims in India. They are watching, they will get radicalized. Then he talks about 1.3 billion Muslims in the rest of the world who are watching this and they are going to get radicalized. What's he trying to say? What's he trying to do? I think it is really unfortunate for a leader of a country to, in the apex forum of the world, in the UN General Assembly, to come and make such appalling statements. You know, I'm really shocked. I'm really shocked and I feel sorry that people have had to hear this kind of a thing. And he's trying to show so much of innocence and hurt. You know, I mean, he needs to look within himself. Where are all these terrorists coming from? He talks about there is no Islamic terror. Where are all these terrorists coming from? They have been promoted by his own state, by his own army. Who are the ones who has picked up young boys, put the thought of terrorism and radicalized them and sent them out to get killed? He doesn't acknowledge any of that.
Right.
And then he blames the West, he blames others for what he calls Islamophobia. So I would say it's a very unfortunate speech.
All right, point well taken. If I can go to my other guest, Ambassador Arun K. Singh. Ambassador Singh, it was some would say a short, crisp speech by Prime Minister Modi, about 17 minutes. But in such occasions, what a leader omits is as significant as what the leader mentions in their speech. So what do you make of Prime Minister Modi's speech, the thing that he said and did not say?
Quite true. And I think very obviously the Prime Minister in his speech made no reference to Pakistan because the message is clear. India is not a single country or single issue focused nation. Instead, he focused on issues that are concerned to the United Nations, signaling that India has diverse and global interests. He spoke about the fact that India is the largest democracy in the world. I mean, the size of Indian electorate is more than the population of the United States and Europe combined. And contrast that with the other totalitarian trends in the world today. So India is a shining example for one set of values, and that's what he was emphasizing. He also referred to the kind of development challenges that India is facing, the kind of message that India's success in meeting these development challenges heralds to other developing countries, be they in Africa, be they in Latin America, again something that the United Nations is focused upon. He made a reference to the rich and historical civilizational tradition that India has, quoting a poet from 3,000 years ago, and also India's linguistic diversity. Then there was a lot of focus on climate change issues, how India has not contributed to global warming, but is in the lead of steps being taken to deal with the challenge of global warming, be it in terms of the Solar Alliance and now looking at a coalition for disaster-resilient infrastructure. But also I found of importance in the Prime Minister's speech is the manner in which he referred to the challenge of terrorism. And he made it clear that to deal with this challenge, the world cannot shrink into its national perimeters. Because if you look at the 9/11 attack, it happened in the United States and happened from the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, half the world away. And in today's context, with today's spread of technology, radicalization is happening in one country but is being hated from somewhere else in the world. So this was the message, that the world needs to come together, nations need to come together, deal with the challenge on the basis of multilateralism and not look at it from the perspective of narrow national interests. And so I think these were some of the important messages that came out from the Prime Minister's speech relevant to today's global context.
Sure, point well taken, Ambassador Singh. Dr. Anish Goyal, what did you make of the two contrasting speeches by Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Imran Khan? The text, subtext and context of those two speeches. For instance, did Prime Minister Modi tick all the right boxes in your estimation?
Well, thank you for having me, Ramesh. And I was struck by the difference in tone by the two speeches. Prime Minister Modi's was very optimistic, very forward-looking, sort of touting India as a global leader for development. Yes, he did also mention terrorism, which is very important, but it was in the context of global terrorism. The target is clear, as Ambassador Singh said, but he didn't belabor the point. When you contrast that to Prime Minister Khan's speech, which I thought was fairly pessimistic and very negative, and talking about all the negative things that are going to happen in the region. And what it occurs to me is that Prime Minister Khan's speech was the target audience was, I think, his domestic constituency back in Pakistan, who want to see him take this strong line against India on the global stage. Whereas Prime Minister Modi's speech was focused more on the international audience, and I think you saw that quite clearly in the two speeches.
All right, gentlemen, hold your thought. I want to take a moment or two to share with our viewers a report filed by my colleague Palki Sharma Upadhyay from New York. Take a look.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as he's just concluded his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, he gave a message of peace and harmony. He spoke about a lot of subjects, and this is what the Indian contingent had been waiting for. And we saw repeatedly, as he quoted from old saints and poets and leaders in India, he spoke about Indian tradition. There were many rounds of applause and clapping as Prime Minister Narendra Modi put forth India's agenda. We are inside one of the press galleries. Here you see a lot of these press booths where journalists from across the world have gathered to witness this event, and we saw the Prime Minister taking the stage and putting forth India's point, and the Indian delegation now following the Prime Minister as he makes his way out. Remember, he'll be leaving for Frankfurt later today, and he has spent a week here, almost a week here, one of the longest visits. He started with interactions with the Indian community, the big engagement that he had in Houston, the Howdy Modi event, which was historic. And since then, he's had a lot of meetings on the sidelines, a lot of engagements. He's met business leaders, and he has furthered India's agenda on the global stage. He has taken leadership on climate change. This has been a hugely successful week for the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, as India has taken the lead on issues that matter to the world, and India has come with a diverse agenda, and India has raised the issues that matter to the entire world and has not remained restricted to the challenges in its neighborhood.
And I want to share some interesting data with our viewers. Now, Imran Khan exceeded the time allocated for his UNG address. Imran's rants about Kashmir for 25 minutes in his speech. He spoke for more than 50 minutes totally, but he spent 25 minutes of the time on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, while Prime Minister Modi spoke for about 20 minutes at the UNGA, and Prime Minister Modi respected the UNGA timeline for his speech. Mr. Tilak Deveshwar, talking about Imran's rant at the UNGA now. His obsession with India, stands exposed. He names India 25 times. He mentions Kashmir over 21 times. And he also refers to Prime Minister Modi and the RSS 9 times in his speech. At the same time, he justifies terror and violence by saying that, on the one hand, while Kashmiri Muslims are being targeted, nothing is happening to the Kashmiri Hindus. He conveniently forgets that it was the Islamist extremism in the first place that drove Kashmiri Hindus out of the valley.
Absolutely. Before I come to this, just one very significant contrast between the two speeches.
Sure.
Imran Khan quotes an American movie, Death Wish.
Right.
And Prime Minister Modi quotes a 3,000-year-old Tamil poem. Look at the contrast in the vision of the two men and what they are trying to project. Here he's talking about the movie, and Prime Minister Modi talking about a 3,000-year-old Tamil poem.
Indeed.
So that is one thing. Secondly, yes, Imran Khan doesn't know, his history. The fact that the Hindu Kashmiri Pandits were pushed out, he doesn't talk anything about them. All he's talking about is, and then even saying 900,000 Indian troops. Where has he got this figure from? That he says 180,000 troops were rushed into the valley. Again, what is he talking about? Obviously, he's not been briefed, or he's just, shouting from the top of his hat. And then, if you remember, he wrote an article in the New York Times on 30th of August. His speech is almost a verbatim repeat of that article. He has nothing new to say. It's the same rant. He kept repeating not only what he written earlier, but even in the speech, the 25 minutes that he spoke on Kashmir, he kept repeating himself, saying the same thing over and over again. So it became a rambling speech rather than to say what your point, which you want to make at this forum, say it briefly, say it crisply. So that was totally lost in his speech. There was so much of repetition and so much of things that didn't make sense.
Right.
So he's talking about incitement to violence. And, it was a very poor sort of performance.
All right, Ambassador Singh, I want to take you back to 2014 when Prime Minister Modi made his maiden speech in the UNGA. And if I can quote from his speech there, he says, India desired a peaceful and stable environment for its development as a nation's destiny was linked to its neighborhood. He says he was prepared to engage in a serious bilateral dialogue with Pakistan in a peaceful atmosphere without the shadow of terrorism. And he goes on to say, Pakistan must also take responsibility to create an appropriate environment. Now, the fact that all of this was missing from his speech this year in 2019, what does that tell you about the current state of India-Pakistan's ties and where these two countries might be headed in the days to come?
Clearly, things have come a long way since 2014, and when the Prime Minister was first elected at that time, the message was that he wanted to move positively with Pakistan, subject, of course, to Pakistan taking action on terrorism. He had invited the then Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to his inauguration in 2014. And then in 2015, December, he had gone to Lahore visiting Nawaz Sharif and his family when there was a wedding in the family. Again, a gesture that he wanted to move positively with Pakistan. But that visit had been followed by several terrorist incidents in India. And that had made it very difficult for the Indian government to move positively with the process with Pakistan. And since then, the number of terrorist events sponsored by Pakistan, the incident in Pulwama in February this year, then there have been sort of exchange of attacks, there's been firing along the line of control. So the assessment has been that Pakistan has not really taken effective steps to deal with the challenge of terrorism. There is no really meaningful action against people like Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar of Jaish-e-Mohammed. So given that, it becomes difficult for the government to move positively. And if you look at Imran Khan's comments today, two other things struck out for me. One, the general international message is that there can be no justification for terrorism. And Imran Khan, in his message, was providing justification for terrorism. And he needs to be clearly called out on that. Second, he's tried to lay all the blame on the West, Western countries, for sponsoring jihad, for working with Pakistan to train militant groups against the Soviet Union.
Right.
But does not want to take responsibility for Pakistan's own decisions in joining those processes and not taking action to rein in those groups once that process was over, even if he wanted to offer some justification for that. So the fact remains that today he sought to justify terrorism, which is not acceptable in the international context. Second, there can be no justification for saying that I'm not taking any actions against terrorist groups and I'm giving them safe haven in Pakistan just because that was the strategy that had been adopted 20 years ago.
Right.
So I think on both these points, he needs to be called out. And on both these points, I think the international community also needs to reinforce the message that this kind of articulation, this kind of action on the ground is simply not acceptable.
All right, Anish, I'll come to you momentarily, but I want to play for our viewers a report filed by another of my colleagues, Anas Malik, from inside the UNGA. Take a look.
Well, absolutely. The Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan just got done speaking at the UN. His speech lasted for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and he spoke extensively, extempore on 4 points. The first of its point was on climate change, the second being on money laundering, the third being on Islamophobia, and the fourth being on Kashmir. He spoke extensively on that, a much anticipated speech. He, in a way, sort of threatened India that we will fight till death, threatened the United Nations that we will fight till death. He ranted on Kashmir. He said that he urged, quote unquote, that he would urge the United Nations to intervene and end the siege in Kashmir, and that he would ask the United Nations to ensure the right to self-determination. In addition, he also spoke on Islamophobia and that marginalization of a community leads to radicalization. He spoke on climate change. He took a lot of digs. By and large, Imran Khan spoke extempore. He had only 4 points, and more of that among those 4 points focused on Kashmir. A much anticipated address that lasted for about 40 minutes. Anas Malik in the United Nations General Assembly in New York for WION World is One.
Right, Anish, very quickly, Imran Khan wanted mediation. The US and the UN said no. Imran Khan wanted more pressure to be applied on the government of India. The US and the UN said no. Trump, for himself, said, guys, work it out among yourself. Alice Wells said that she expected the world to speak about the Uyghurs in China as well, and not just about Muslims in the Indian region of Jammu and Kashmir. So do you think there is a fatigue setting in the world community on the issue of Kashmir and India-Pak relations generally?
So I don't know if fatigue is the right word, but definitely a reluctance to talk about these issues. We saw it earlier. You know, Prime Minister Khan made a concerted effort to get the UN Security Council to debate this matter, and it didn't happen. And his entire visit to the UN over the last week has been very heavily focused on Kashmir and trying to trigger some sort of conversation. And the members of the UN General Assembly just don't seem interested in it. And so I think that there is just a lack of desire, and there maybe is a lack of willingness to talk about this issue at the UN.
All right, gentlemen, time for a very short break. Do stay on. You're watching the continuous coverage here on WION World is One of the developments from the United Nations in New York. Don't go anywhere.
Prime Minister Modi in New York.
We are the iconic Times Square.